So in today's lesson, we are going to recap again, okay, to outline the role of sensory receptor cells. Sensory receptor cell, because in the stimulus response model, we start with receptor, right? So far you have looked at the neuron, which is part of the transmission of the stimulus response model. So now we're going to look at the receptor. So we're going to look at sensory receptor cell as an example receptor, okay, in detecting stimuli and then stimulating the transmission of nerve impulses in the sensory neuron. Then after that, we're going to look at one example of the sensory receptor cells. So describe the sequence of events that results in an action potential in a sensory neuron using chemoreceptor cell in human taste bud as an example. That means once there are some tastes, okay, how is it that the chemoreceptor is able to receive this stimulus? How does it convert it so that it can send an electrical impulse through the sensory neuron to our brain so we know what we are eating, okay? So in the previous lesson, we have looked at communication system, which is made up of nervous system and endocrine system. And we have also looked at the reflex arc as an example of the simplest stimulus response model, where you learn 3 neurons are involved. So you have also looked at the structure and the function of the neuron. And you have also looked at the initiation of action potential in a neuron that is at rest. How do we kickstart the action potential? Okay, we have also looked at the synapse structure and function and the role of having synapse in our body. Okay. So today we are going to look at the roles of sensory receptor cell as an example of receptor. So it is a cell, okay, or a group of cells. So sensory receptor cells, okay, the receptor cell is supposed to be able to receive the stimulus energy, and then after that be able to stimulate the sensory neuron to start to send an electrical impulse. So the stimulus energy eventually, in whatever form is the energy, right? It can be light, sound, taste, smell, touch, pain, heat, pressure, movement, okay? Light, sound, okay? It will be converted to electrical energy in the form of electrical impulse, because this is the only way sensory neuron can send the message, okay? So in receptor cell, when the receptor cell receives a stimulus, its membrane will depolarize. Okay, even though it may not be a neuron, but its membrane will depolarize. So after the stimulus, the membrane depolarizes. So the membrane will have got a membrane potential, right? So that membrane potential, when the receptor cell stimuli, when the receptor cell depolarizes, is called receptor potential. Means membrane potential of the receptor. Okay, so this receptor potential will then act as an electrical stimulus to stimulate this sensory neuron because it's nearby. So this receptor potential will stimulate the sensory neuron. So this is electrical stimulus, and that will cause the membrane of the sensory neuron to depolarize. So that membrane potential is called generator potential, because it's going to generate an action potential. Okay, so generator potential. So this will initiate action potential formation, so the nerve impulse can be transmitted. So this is an overview of the entire process. Okay, so role of receptor cell is to detect or receive the stimulus, and then followed by transduction, means conversion of the energy of stimulus to electrical energy. So the stimulus energy converted to electrical energy in the form of receptor potential first. Okay, and then this receptor potential becomes an electrical stimulus to stimulate nerve impulse transmission, because you learned before, the neuron is able to receive 3 types of stimulus, right? 3 types of stimulus: mechanical, electrical, and chemical. So this is electrical stimulus, okay? So receptor potential becomes a stimulus, causing generator potential to be produced in neuron, and then sending an action potential along the neuron in the form of nerve or electrical impulse. Okay, so we are going to look at chemoreceptor cells in the taste bud, how this entire process of receiving stimulus, transduction, and then stimulating nerve impulse transmission can occur. Okay, so before that, let's look at the receptor cell. There are two types of receptor cell. Okay, first, because this is primary, this is secondary. Okay, so the first type of receptor cell is actually a neuron. So this is a neuron itself, where one end of this neuron is able to detect the stimulus, okay, and then convert it into whatever membrane potential you need. So this is called the primary receptor. It is the nerve ending of a sensory neuron. Okay, secondary receptor is not a neuron. Okay, it's not a neuron. It is a specialized cell that can detect the stimulus and also carry out the necessary action like transduction, as well as stimulating the neighboring sensory cell to start to send electrical potential. So this type of cell is called the secondary receptor cell. Okay, so it's a specialized cell, or it can be a group of cells. So both of them, whether it is the primary receptor or secondary receptor, they are able to carry out their function as a receptor, which is to receive the stimulus and then convert the stimulus energy to electrical energy, which is the electrical impulse, to be transmitted along the sensory neuron. Okay, so this table shows you all sorts of receptor cells in our body, and what this receptor cell is able to sense. That means what kind of stimulus is able to receive, and the form of energy of the stimulus is going to be able to receive. So you need to at least memorize two examples. You need to memorize two examples from here. Okay, so taste bud is in your syllabus, so you want to actually memorize taste bud, which can sense the taste, and the energy of the stimulus. The taste is actually chemical potential energy. Then rod cell and cone cell is able to sense the sight. They are able to sense the light. Okay, the rest you can see. We have got the Pacinian corpuscle is a touch receptor. It means we can sense the pressure. Okay, this one also Meissner corpuscle also can sense the pressure. Then we got nerve ending that can sense temperature. Okay, location of your limbs also we can sense, balance of your body, hearing, smelling. Okay, so we're going to look at the chemoreceptor in our taste bud in the tongue as an example of receptor cell and how it works to generate an action potential in the sensory neuron. Okay, so our tongue is covered with many small little bumps. Have you seen it before? It's not smooth, right? Our tongues. Okay, it's made up of very tiny little bumps like this. It's called papillae, right? Papillae. So each papilla has many taste buds. So this is papilla, one papilla, many papillae. At the side here, okay, which curve inwards. Inside here, there are many taste buds. So this is one taste bud. This is another. This is another. So this is an enlarged portion of one taste bud. And inside one taste bud, you can find a group of chemoreceptor cells, all right, in the taste bud. So each taste bud has about 50 to 100 chemoreceptor cells, and each chemoreceptor cell has many receptor proteins on the membrane that can detect the dissolved chemicals of the food that dissolve in saliva and drinks. So our taste bud can only detect the taste that or the chemical that is already dissolved. So if it's totally dry, right, you can't taste anything. So it must dissolve either in the water or in your food, okay, or in the saliva. So different receptor proteins. So we can taste so many different kind of taste because we've got different receptor protein for different chemical that gives the taste. Okay, so the basic 5 tastes that we are able to taste, which is very interesting: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, we know, right? And then umami. You know umami? They say umami means savory. something that enhances the taste, strong taste, rich taste, intense taste is umami. So you add Ajinomoto, there's umami. It's not salty, right? It's not sweet, right? But it tastes like quite strong, isn't it? Okay, so they call that one umami. Okay, so on the right side, so this is chemoreceptor cells, so one chemoreceptor cell in the taste bud. Okay, right. So let's say, for example, we want to detect the salts in our food. Okay, so sodium ion of salt, right? It will act as a stimulus because we're going to taste this sodium ion. Okay, so sodium ion will enter the cell, means influx, right? Influx through a highly selective channel protein. So there's channel protein on the membrane of the microvilli. So these are the microvilli of the receptor cell, chemoreceptor cell. Okay, so when this sodium ion diffuse into the cell through the channel protein, then the membrane of the receptor cell depolarizes. So this is very similar to neurons, right? Sodium ion diffuse in, membrane depolarizes. Okay, so therefore when membrane depolarizes, it has got a certain membrane potential, which is called the receptor potential, because this is a receptor cell. So the membrane potential is called receptor potential. So the more the sodium ion in our food or drink, let's say that you drink the soup, very salty, right? So the more salty it is, the more sodium ion concentration, the more the receptor potential, the higher is the receptor potential, right? Because more sodium ion comes in. So therefore, the receptor potential is higher. Until if it goes above threshold potential, then voltage-gated calcium ion channel will open. Okay, so this part is similar to synapse already, right? Can you see that? This part is similar to synapse already. You're a bit blur. Okay, if you revise, you need to revise consistently, then you know, because everything is built on the previous one. Okay, then it becomes very easy. So calcium, so it's like when membrane potential arrive here, then calcium ion channel protein will open, voltage gated channel. Okay, so therefore calcium influx will happen. That means calcium will diffuse into the cell because there's a concentration gradient there. Okay, so then it will cause neurotransmitter, okay, to be released at the base of the cell. See here? So neurotransmitter will release from the vesicles to the base of the cell, and then by exocytosis. So if the receptor potential that's created here when sodium comes in is lower than threshold potential, then there's a delocalized depolarization. So calcium ions will not come in. Neurotransmitter will not be released. Okay? So that means to say that when your food is not salty, right? It's there's sodium ion, but it's not a lot. You may not be able to taste the saltiness. So you will not sense the saltiness. So the more the sodium ion above a certain threshold, remember, every stimulus that we receive, it must be above a threshold stimulus, right? Then only we can detect. Okay, so over here, same thing. Sodium ion comes in, membrane depolarizes. So there's a receptor potential. But if there's not enough sodium ion, the membrane does not depolarize to above threshold potential, like this graph here. So sodium ion streams in, membrane depolarizes. But there's not a lot of sodium ion in the food. So therefore, it depolarizes up to here only at a certain time, within a certain time. So this point here is below the threshold potential. So therefore, it will not shoot up. It will go back down to resting potential. Okay. So if the sodium ion in our food is very high in concentration, then it's going to diffuse into the cell very fast and it should above threshold potential, then it will continue to go up to the maximum, which will stimulate the voltage-gated calcium ion channels to open. And then only it can start to send message through the sensory neuron and we can actually detect the saltiness in our food. Okay. So this is to actually prevent us from being overstimulated. That means to say that a little bit of pressure, a little bit change of temperature, a little bit of taste, everything also being stimulated. They'll be overstimulated. Okay, they're very busy to attend to the stimulus. Okay, so the neurotransmitter that's released here into the tissue fluid surrounding the cell, okay, will diffuse to the nearby sensory neuron. So this is a sensory neuron near to the receptor. And then it will start to depolarize. When it diffuses across, then the neuron membrane will start to depolarize. Okay. So this will kickstart the entire formation of action potential. So that means to say there is an electrical stimulus. Calcium ion got positive charge, right? Okay, calcium ion got positive charge. So this is a calcium ion is an electrical stimulus to stimulate this sensory neuron to produce an action potential. Okay, so when it stimulates this neuron will depolarize, right? So membrane potential will increase. So when membrane potential is higher than threshold potential in the sensory neuron, then action potential will be generated and transmitted to the taste center in the cerebral cortex of our brain. So it goes to the brain so we can know what we are tasting. Okay. One more thing I need to tell you is that how does your brain know that whether this message is a vision, this is a pressure, this is a temperature, this is a pain, this is a taste, this is a smell? It is, you see, because everything is sent by action potential, right? Every message along the neuron is sent by electrical impulse. So your brain can actually distinguish between different kind of stimulus based on the location of the receptor cell. It's actually based on the location of receptor cell. So if this neuron is sending message coming from our taste bud, because the brain will know that this stimulus comes from your taste bud, so it will be the taste. Okay, this stimulus comes from the pain receptor, it's actually the pain. From pressure receptor or touch receptor, it is a touch. So it knows based on location of receptor. Okay. So the higher the stimulus intensity means the more salty it is, the higher is the frequency of action potential. Okay, because how do we know that, oh, this is more salty than the other? Because action potential is always positive 30 millivolt, right? We know based on the frequency of action potential. So the more salty is the food or drink, the higher is the frequency of action potential sent along this sensory neuron. Okay. So also same thing, after you take something very salty for some time, right? It's not so salty already. It's like you adapt to it, right? After you go to room very hot for some time, you adapt to it, not so hot already.
Sure. The amount of saltiness is higher, so like the refractory period is shorter.
Refractory period is the same. Refractory period is the same. It will not change. The refractory period of the neuron will not change. It's the action potential will keep on be sent. That means to say that if your sodium ion concentration is very high, when you stimulate the neuron, okay, an action potential will be generated, but you still got a lot of sodium ion can streams in. So the moment that point recover back from refractory period, it will be stimulated again to send another action potential. So in a short period of time, how many sodium ion diffuse into the cell to stimulate it is how many action, it will result in how many action potential can be sent. Because if you only got a group, that group already entered the cell send action potential and then it stopped already. But you got a lot of sodium ion, you keep on stimulating the neuron, and then every time you stimulate it, when it come back to rest, because when it's not at resting potential, it cannot be stimulated, right? So in a short period of time, when it's able to, there are stimulus that continue to stimulate it because the stimulus is very strong, then it continue to fire action potential. So that create the frequency. Okay, it's like here, you got a lot of sodium ion comes in, right? Okay, and then it keep on depolarize, calcium ion keep on going in. So the calcium ion is always there, very high concentration. But then this neuron, once receive calcium ion, it will only send one action potential, right? But because you got a lot, then once it come to rest, the stimulus is still there. So you still kick another one, kickstart another one, then fire another one, then fire another one until there's no more calcium. It means calcium is removed back into the cell by active transport. Oh, sorry, calcium, sorry, not calcium, sodium ion. So this part is sodium ion. So until sodium ion is removed from this region here. Okay, So how many sodium ions here is depending on this concentration. The higher the sodium ion, okay, then the more depolarization will occur for some time, the more calcium will come in, the more neurotransmitter released, then the higher is the charge. Then when the sodium streams in, you still have got sodium ion here. Okay, so that will cause many action potential to be fired as long as you still have that sodium ions here. And how much sodium ions released depend on how much you have over here. Okay, good question, that one. So let's look at a passive question, number 6B. Yeah? Explain using a named example how sensory receptors in mammals convert energy to action potential. So you only need to give a named example and then tell the mechanism of how from stimulus is converted to action potential, 8 marks. So if it's a new syllabus, then it's maximum 7 marks. Okay, structured question, maximum 7 marks. Essay can be 8 or 9 marks, okay? So in general, the receptor cell can respond to stimuli, or I can say any other word of the same effect. So it can receive the stimulus, okay? And there are 2 types of receptors, right? Primary receptors are the receptors that are found at the ends of sensory neuron. Secondary receptors are receptors that are specialized cell or group of cells. So when they receive the stimulus, they are able to convert the energy of stimulus. So they are energy transducer. So they convert energy from one form to the other. Okay, the stimulus energy to electrical energy. So for example, the stimulus will cause sodium ion channels to open. Sodium ions enter the cell. So this is for the salt, okay? So then the cell depolarizes to produce the receptor potential in the cell, okay? And then eventually this will cause the sensory neuron to depolarize. So that will create generator potential. Now they put these 2 together because if you are talking about the receptor, primary receptor, right, which is also a neuron, so the receptor potential is also equals to generator potential because the receptor is also a neuron, okay? But if it's a separate receptor, the second receptor separate from the neuron, the receptor will have got receptor potential, the sensory neuron will have got generator potential, okay? So if the receptor potential in the receptor cell is greater than the threshold potential, then only action potential can be generated. So this is called all or nothing law. Okay. So when you increase stimulus strength, how will we know that the stimulus strength is higher? It leads to an increase in frequency of action potential. Okay. So this is also the example. So because the question asks a student to give example, right? Okay, example. So allow any 2 below. That means if you give 2, you get 2 marks, even though the question says give 1 will do. Okay. So example, so you need to learn up the name of receptor like rod cells and cone cells, detecting light, taste bud, or olfactory cell, detecting chemical. Olfactory is for your smell, okay? Also detect chemical, okay? Others, I think if you want, you can memorize whichever you feel that you prefer, okay? So these are examples of the sensory, the neuron, okay? The neuron, so not neuron, there's receptors in the skin, okay? So this one is very interesting. This one can detect heat. So the shape is like this, okay? Pain receptor usually like this one. It's a free nerve ending, okay? This is pressure receptor, Pacinian corpuscle. So this one is taste bud. This one is in the ear, right? Cochlea in the ear, which is this whole thing is this part here contain the hair cells, okay, which is able to detect the balancing of your body. Okay, and this one is olfactory in the nose. This is cone cell and rod cell, which can detect light and also bright and darkness. Okay. Cone is the one that can detect color, right? Whereas rod is the one that only can detect brighter or less bright. Okay. So you have learned for today the role of sensory receptor cells. Sensory receptor cells. Okay, that means a cell which is a receptor which is able to detect the stimulus, okay, and convert it into an energy, convert it into electrical energy to be transmitted by sensory neuron. So first function, the role of sensory receptor, first function is to detect or receive the stimulus, then transduction is conversion of energy. Okay. So stimulus energy is converted to electrical energy, which is called the receptor potential in the receptor cell first. Then after that, this receptor potential can act as a stimulus to actually stimulate the neighboring sensory neuron, okay, to generate an action potential. So the membrane potential of sensory neuron is called generator potential because it's used to generate the action potential. Then, once action potential is generated, there will be nerve impulse transmission along the sensory neuron to the brain, where it will process the information and will give you the information based on the location of the neuron. Okay, so receptor potential is used as a stimulus to cause generator potential to be produced. Then action potential, when generator potential is above threshold potential, okay, then action potential can be produced and then sent as electrical impulse. Okay,